Welcome to this explainer. Now, when you picture a nurse, what comes to mind? You probably think of compassion, right? You think of someone running toward emergencies, administering life-saving medications, and bringing comfort in our absolute darkest hours. We basically view them as healers. But behind the scrubs and the stethoscopes, there's a hidden shadow epidemic taking place on almost every single shift. It's a reality that completely contradicts the very nature of what they do. So today, we're going to explore a really jarring contradiction: the life-saving nature of nursing compared to the very real physical dangers these professionals face while they're literally trying to save our lives. Here is the jarring reality. 67%, just let that sink in for a second. 67% of all non-fatal workplace violence injuries occur in healthcare. Let me repeat that because it's wild. More than 2/3 of all workplace violence injuries across every single industry you can possibly think of, law enforcement, construction, retail, they happen in healthcare settings. The very people rigorously trained to heal trauma are the ones absorbing the vast majority of workplace violence. And when we break this epidemic down further, the reality gets even darker. 50% report being bullied on the job. A staggering 25%, that's literally 1 in 4 nurses, report being physically assaulted by a patient or a family member. But the most alarming part? It's that bottom number, 30%. Only 30% of nurses who are victims of violence ever actually report the incident. This means the staggering numbers we just looked at are vastly undercounted. There's this silent acceptance, a culture of just sweeping it under the rug, which makes treating this epidemic incredibly difficult. Now, I want to pause here to let the gravity of this specific statistic really hit home. In a 2014 study of 125 emergency department nurses, 70% were physically assaulted. 7 out of 10. If you walk into an emergency room right now and see 10 nurses working frantically to save lives, statistically speaking, 7 of them have been physically battered while doing their job. This isn't just a data point on a chart. This is human trauma. It is an unacceptable working condition for anyone, let alone the very people we depend on for our survival. So what are we actually talking about when we say workplace violence? Well, it encompasses physical assaults, threatening behavior, verbal abuse, and threats of assault directed toward persons at work or on duty. Now, I want to challenge you for a moment. Just imagine your own daily profession. Imagine sitting at your desk or in a meeting or on a job site and accepting being threatened or assaulted as just a normal part of your Tuesday. You'd probably quit, right? Or call the police immediately. Yet in nursing, it has somehow become dangerously normalized. You can really see how this builds when we compare the types of violence. On the non-physical side, we've got insults, racial slurs, harassment, verbal threats, intimidation, and hostile, sarcastic comments. That alone is enough to create a completely toxic work environment. But then look at the physical examples. We aren't just talking about a stray shove here. We're talking about nurses being pushed, spat on, punched, slapped, bitten, having heavy objects thrown at them, being choked, raped, and even shot at. These are felonies, yet they are happening inside the very walls meant for healing. So how in the world do we fix this? Well, it starts with a massive shift in mindset. For generations, there's been this really toxic superhero complex in nursing. It's this idea that to be a quote-unquote good nurse, you just have to absorb the abuse, take the hit, and keep smiling because, hey, the patient is sick. We have to completely shatter that myth. Being abused is absolutely not all in a day's work. The fundamental shift required here is a strict move to zero tolerance. Because think about it, if we don't protect the healers, there's going to be no one left to heal us. What's absolutely fascinating is how we need to approach the solution. We literally have to start treating violence like a clinical diagnosis. Just like a nurse looks for tracheal deviation to catch a collapsing lung, they must be empowered to look for the early warning signs and symptoms of patient escalation. We're talking about anxiety, confusion, agitation, early escalation of verbal or nonverbal signs, and mounting patient frustrations. By identifying these triggers early, nurses can add them directly to the care plan and intervene way before a situation turns physical. And part of that clinical intervention, it means actively managing the physical environment. Chairs, footstools, IV poles, housekeeping supplies, glass from mirrors. In a normal setting, these are completely innocuous objects, right? An IV pole delivers life-saving hydration and medication. But in the hands of an agitated, escalating patient, that heavy metal IV pole instantly becomes a dangerous weapon. Identifying and securing these environmental risks is a crucial, actionable step in keeping the unit safe. Beyond just the physical environment, nurses have to deploy elite communication strategies for de-escalation. This involves building rapid trust, actively listening and validating the patient's feelings, showing respect, and really clearly explaining the care being provided. Even managing their own body language and giving the patient a sense of control can drastically decrease re-traumatization and diffuse highly tense situations. It's essentially psychological first aid deployed in real time under extreme pressure. Bringing this all together, we have our core prevention tactics. Avoiding power struggles is absolutely key. You simply cannot fight fire with fire in a clinical setting. Focusing on feelings and planning for how to deliver bad news helps manage the emotional volatility of healthcare. But notice the big emphasis here on setting limits and enforcing unit rules. Being compassionate does not mean allowing yourself to be a punching bag. Setting strict, unwavering boundaries is a crucial intervention for maintaining nurse safety. When we strip away all the clinical strategies, we are left with a pretty heartbreaking contrast. It's a defensive posture of healing. We have professionals in scrubs tasked with the incredible, heavy responsibility of saving human life, who are mentally forced to hold up a heavy riot shield just to protect themselves on the job. That defensive, combat-ready posture completely obscures the healing role they're actually meant to play. Which leads us to a really pressing final thought. Nurses undergo years of rigorous scientific and medical training to save our lives. They memorize complex diagnostics, work exhausting shifts, and sacrifice their own well-being for our health. But should they really need a riot shield to protect their own lives while doing it? It's time we finally shatter that superhero myth, acknowledge this hidden epidemic, and demand systemic change. Because at the end of the day, a healthcare system that doesn't protect its nurses is a system that eventually collapses on itself. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this completely changes how you view the incredible and incredibly dangerous work our nurses do every single day.